Welcome to Shameless. Here we explore the transformative power of courage and action.
So I think there's really two broad categories of personality types. There's personality types which are used just to determine personality traits, preferences, and are used by the general public and would utilize something called a self-report inventory. So this is usually where you get questions like, how would you respond if you were at a party and the music died down, and then you kind of self-evaluate and self-assess. And then based on your responses, it gives you an idea of what your personality type or traits might be. So that would be one category of assessments that are out there. And within that category, there's so many different personality types. So this is assessments, I mean. So this is where you would find your things like the Myers-Briggs, the 16PF, the Big Five, the Enneagram, the DISC, all of those things would be kind of under those categories. I think Jordan Peterson even came up with a new personality assessment recently. So I'm assuming his would probably fall into that category as well. And then you also have other personality assessments which are used in a more clinical setting. And these are used to determine pathology. And I wanted to be clear as well that usually the assessments that are used, just the general personality assessments that utilize self-report, tend to be used and based. So when we're talking about the validation process or the process of making sure that these assessments are actually reliable, they're based on normal human behavior. So again, that brings in the question of personality types or personality assessments dealing with traumatized individuals, because traumatized individuals necessarily in their quote unquote normal state. So they deal with normal behavior. So what they're assessing is normal behavior to identify personality type. And then in the clinical setting, we'll use other instruments which are more projective to try and find out if there's any pathology. So if there's any personality disorders that someone is living with. And then so those instruments are a little bit different. Some of them are self-report. A lot of them you require a clinician to work alongside with you to be able to get the results and to be able to give you an accurate understanding of what might be going on. And this might include things like the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is a doozy of an assessment. Or things like, I think we've all at some point heard of, when we think of psychologists, we think of the Rorschach, which is that ink blot test. That's a projective personality test. So yeah, those are the two major classifications of personality assessments that are out there. So the general population would be using your MBTIs and all of those to determine their personality preferences and traits. And then you also have the clinical side as well.
You touched upon the validity of the personality test. So how do we then make sure that they're reliable and valid? And is there any room to, I guess, apply our cultural and social influences when we're looking at someone's personality, whether it's self-administered or whether it's with a practitioner, whether it's clinical, etc.?
Yeah. So I guess the two parts to that question, and I'll answer them separately. But so the first part on, I guess, validity and reliability, how can you tell if an assessment is valid or reliable? Usually you can find this information if you're diligent enough in your research around the personality instrument that you're looking to use to see, has this tool been tested on broad demographics? Are there scholarly articles that actually tell you that this is a research-based instrument and is not just, someone being like, let me tell you what your sign is, how that, how it affects your personality or whatever else it is. But is there actually evidence out there? If you research, are you able to find that this is actually a tool that has been tested and tried and proven to measure what it's saying that it's going to measure? And then when you talk about like the cultural contexts that we exist in, and how do we make sure that the validity and the reliability of these assessments translates culturally, I think this is where it's important to even just have the input of someone who understands clinical assessments and understands how they work, with the background of a variety of different cultures and demographics, so that if an instrument has not been utilized in a particular context and you're wanting to utilize it in that particular context, guidance can be given as to A, whether it's even a good instrument to use in that context, or B, how to go about doing that if it could be translated or utilized in a different cultural context. But yeah, I think it's so important for us to be aware that a lot of these instruments, especially for us in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of these instruments have been developed in more Anglo-Saxon regions of the world. And so culturally, there's a very big difference between there and here. So you might even find some questions which, culturally speaking, might have various or different implications. So having an understanding of that, and even being, excited or proactive about making them culturally relevant, I think is definitely something to be considered and to look into. But yeah, I think for now, I guess based on what is out there and looking at culture, it would be about doing due diligence and just making sure that you're working with people who understand these instruments and understand the impact that it might have on culture in order to be able to utilize them effectively if you are going to utilize them. And that being said, there are also a lot of tools that have come out of sub-Saharan Africa that I think, for us culturally speaking, we can say, yes, this speaks to our culture. It speaks to who we are. I know there's Zanga African Metrics. They do some leadership profiles for individuals, and that's out of sub-Saharan Africa. And also there's some companies in South Africa that have developed some tools. I know there's JVR. They do a lot of psychometrics that are developed out of the African context. So do due diligence, find what works and what would work best for the context. And where there is nothing, hey, why not be the first person to create?
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share as we embark on our mission to impact 1 million African lives by 2026.
This podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.